I am very honored to be here this morning, having just heard an absolutely marvelous concert. I find it difficult to go ahead. I'm very grateful to have this great opportunity. And I thank the rector for his kind invitation. As you all know, your rector is a world-leading expert in meteorology and climate studies, and I'm grateful to him for arranging such fine weather on this opening day and on the weekend. Dear students, you are very fortunate, not because you are listening to me, but because you have been admitted to a great university, and because in all of human history, now is perhaps the best time to be alive. Poverty is at the lowest it has ever been, life expectancy at its highest, terrible diseases such as smallpox and polio have been eradicated. The computer has given us access to almost all human knowledge at our fingertips. We are able to share ideas instantly with large networks of friends. We have never been more connected. The future, dear engineering students, is in your hands. The future is your homeland. It will be an exciting and stimulating place, and you will play a role in making it a better and more welcome place and shaping its direction. But we cannot escape a question. Having picked all the fruits of progress, are our gains starting to run out? One difference from our past is that we have regretfully to take into account the fact that we have created the means to destroy ourselves. The nuclear threat is not abolished. In this opening address, I will raise questions that my generation does not know how to answer. Yours will be called upon to tackle them. The years that you will spend here with dedicated teachers and gifted classmates will enable you to forge ahead. I shall throw out a number of ideas with which you may not agree, or which you don't have to agree, before mentioning some specific technological challenges that are facing us at this very moment. If I speak too fast, too loud, or too softly, please do not fall asleep immediately, but raise your hand and wave, and I shall try to make myself clearer. Before we proceed, let us briefly recall the progresses that have led to a better world. Infant mortality has fallen from 45% to below 5% in most countries. Extreme poverty has gone down from some 90% to under 10%. Life expectancy, which was roughly 45 years in 1945 when your grandparents were born, is now around 75 years. Thanks to advances in technology, we can talk to people anywhere in the world and even look them in the eye. On our laptops, we can readily access information that entire libraries cannot contain. This means that we can read the best books and the noblest thoughts of the greatest minds anytime and anywhere, We can listen to the greatest music ever composed. We can solve an infinite number of calculations. We can be guided turn by turn to any location on the planet without a map, with our GPSs, the radio navigation system that allows us, whether we be on land, at sea, airborne, to determine our exact location and our precise speed 24 hours a day in all weather conditions and anywhere in the world. But there are clouds on the horizon. You have come here to meet great challenges and to overcome daunting obstacles. Sociologists warn us about mass unemployment, and they remind us of the machine-breaking incidents that occurred in Britain in the 18th century and in France after the 1789 revolution. As the Industrial Revolution expanded, workers worried about being displaced by increasingly efficient machines, and they tried to destroy them. Recently, the McKinsey Global Institute has forecasted that up to 800 million jobs will be lost worldwide to automation by the year 2030. Now that's only 11 years from now. I hope this forecast will turn out to be wrong. As we all know, prophecy is difficult, especially when it's about the future. The technology that promised to help us to be more connected than ever is, in some ways, making people more disconnected than ever. It has become difficult to cope with the problem of information overload. We are being constantly bombarded by news. The smartphone, and I must check that I've turned mine off. Yes. It used to be presented as a guarantee of personal relationships. Unfortunately, interconnectivity does not always mean inclusivity. There is little sign that the social media encourage broad-mindedness and debate. They are often coarsen political discourse and support or harden extremist views. They can serve to amplify existing prejudices and misconceptions. It is true that they make it easier to expose lies, but they also make it easier to spread them. And as technology improves, virtual reality is becoming common. What I mean is that we can be shown as real what is merely virtual, as if it was occurring at this very moment on television, has often been filmed days or weeks or months before. And the power of the image is such that when I say the word Einstein, you immediately see his picture. And if I utter the word Trump, you see him as seen on television getting out of an helicopter on the White House. Well, virtual reality helps us carry out investigations. We can't do real experiments, and I'm certain that you have all performed virtual experiments in physics and chemistry. Just as video games get more and more elaborate as their consoles get more and more powerful, so as computer power grows, do virtual experiments. I know astronomers who inside the virtual world of their computers, are busy crashing a planet into the Earth to see if that's how our moon might have been formed. And meteorologists simulate weather conditions. Brain scientists simulate how neurons interact. But there are drawbacks. I have just read a report that claims that, as a fact, and I suppose it is true, that children of 8 and older in the United States are in front of screens more than 7 hours per day. According to this survey, only 35% of kids between the ages of 12 and 17 say that they regularly socialize face-to-face, that is, when someone in front of you. 63%, that's roughly 2 out of 3, said they communicated mostly via text messages. And do you know what the average is per day? I checked this before daring to say 167 texts per day. That's even better than President Trump with his Twitters. We think we are all using our cell phones, but sometimes we wind up serving them. Ask yourself, I'm not asking this of the professors, of course, but the engineering students. Do you sleep with your cell phone on your nightstand or in your bed? Do your friends or family complain about your attending to your screen too much? Do you check your cell phone first thing in the morning and last thing at night? Do you check it while attending business meetings, study periods, or lectures at the university? Do you feel annoyed when you forgot to bring your cell phone into the bathroom? Have you practiced the secret art, or better, the art of secretly texting while maintaining eye contact with the person in front of you? If you answer yes to most or all of these questions, you may have a tech addiction. The good, bad news is that you're not alone. I'm also an addict. The marvelous devices at our disposal include universal translators that enable us to access texts in foreign languages. Currently, the two most widely spoken languages are Mandarin, Chinese, and English. But every year, 30 to 50 of the world's 8,000 languages die out, while computers start talking to each other. Is the future of languages in the hands of machines that will simplify and impoverish the syntax and the grammar? A great language like Turkish, could be in trouble with this because of the great richness of its syntax and grammar. Progress in translation has been significantly improved, especially in dealing with idioms. And I would like to pause for a moment to say something about that group of words that are called idioms, that have a meaning that is not deducible from those of the individual words. I have 3 examples here, and here I may have to have the help of an engineer to retrieve them. Can you just, thank you. Take this. One of these, I'm making this pause here so that you will stay with me a bit longer. Over the moon doesn't really mean over the moon. It means extremely pleased and happy. For instance, when he sent me flowers and a note, I was over the moon. Yesterday, I sent an email to a friend and I said, I'm in Istanbul and I'm over the moon. And that's really how I feel. See the light is an idiom, means to gain an understanding of something. It cannot be deduced from seeing the light. Once I was lost in darkness, but now I have seen the light. Finally, John saw the light and withdrew his objection. But my favorite is because a problem that was encountered by someone working on simultaneous translation. Out of sight, out of mind. Out of sight, you don't see it. Out of mind, out of your mind. It means you soon forget people or things that are no longer visible or present, or he'll be locked away for the rest of his life. Out of sight, out of mind. And here is how the translation came out. Blind idiot. Now, these are the challenges that have been partly mastered, and it gets better and better, but I warn you that these problems have not disappeared. As an historian of science and technology, and I'm particularly happy to be speaking in Turkey, which is one of the most important countries in the world at the present time for its production of works in the history of science and technology. So I welcome the opportunity as an historian of science to recall how impressive is the speed with which communication became faster and faster. In 1858, when the first transatlantic cable was laid, communication between Europe and North America was cut from several days to a few minutes. And now? Well, now, if you do not have instant communication, you throw away your smartphone and you get a new one. Advances in the web and the miniaturization of sensors means that growth is now moving very fast. But what about the accompanying problems concerning privacy and security? Are you willing to sacrifice privacy for convenience? And to what extent? Should surveillance be ubiquitous everywhere? All of us in this auditorium this morning can now be identified with ease, not only by our fingerprints, but by face tracers, voice prints, iris scans, under-skin blood flows, instant DNA tests. You future engineers will want to ask, how do we watch the watchers? My generation has not found an answer to that question. Creativity and connectivity are drivers of urbanization. But we are connecting more and more virtually than physically. Things are perhaps better in Turkey than in my city in Switzerland. For when I go out for my daily walk, I come across people whom I know and some who are good friends, but they do not see me or greet me, as was usual, because their eyes are glued to a small screen before their nose. It's an interesting social phenomenon. Our electronic computers can compute far more rapidly and reliably than we can. They are, in that sense, better than we are. And we begin to sense how some future generation of machines might overshadow us in many other respects as well. When we try to extrapolate human science into the far future, it seems clear that artificial forms of intelligence are going to develop far more rapidly than our own mental abilities. Indeed, the latter, namely our mental abilities, might even decline in certain respects, because we no longer need to perform many of the feats of mental dexterity that were once everyday requirements. Mental arithmetic is fast fading as a skill. Calculators make it of little use now. 30 years ago, a boy or a girl who wanted a part-time or a weekend job in a shop was judged on his or her ability to do fast and accurate mental arithmetic. Now all the goods are swiped past the scanner, the bill is printed out, the change is computed for you. It can all be done and is done increasingly by the customer himself or herself without the involvement of a person on the staff. Even at my university, when I ask students what is 36 plus 37, many reach out for their pocket calculator or their mobile phone. Seen in this light, the development of artificial intelligence and more powerful computers look like a decisive step in the evolutionary process. So in the end, who or what will be doing the thinking? We now convey information over large distances virtually, I use the word virtually again, instantaneously, and our minds can apply themselves to more problems in a shorter period of time than ever before. We can foresee a not too distant future in which all computers on our planet will be linked simply and inexpensively into a global network. These developments that you will make will produce a computer future very different from what many people, very good and competent people, were predicting not so many years ago. And again, as an historian of science, I want to emphasize this. In 1943, Thomas Watson, the chairman of IBM, was asked on a radio program they were making, 1943, it's not the Middle Ages, it's just way back there. What did he think about the market for computers? Now, he answered, 1943, think of your grandparents, I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. Let me repeat that because I know you won't believe me on the first try. I think, this is Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM, I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. Hard to believe this if you're students, isn't it? But for the professors, remember the big old machines. As late as 1977, Ken Olsen, the founding president of Digital Equipment Corporation, the acronym is DEC, when asked a similar question, replied, there is no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. 1977, he could say that. Why? Everyone back then expected that computers would just keep getting bigger and more powerful and more expensive. But that's not what happened. Computers got smaller and smaller and cheaper. Virtually everyone has a computer. And their effectiveness is developed most impressively by linking them together into huge networks. It's not so much the size of the components that is of primary importance, but the number of interconnections between them. I mention this because it helps us to ponder if the people who were at the forefront of knowledge back in 1977 could make such wrong forecasts. Perhaps we have to exercise caution about the future. But the intrinsic complexity of recent programs and the self-program abilities of computers would enable them to train themselves. Note that I say the computers will train themselves. And as they do so, we shall have to ask what is meant by saying that they have solved a problem. No serious question will be raised as long as the computer does a number of simple things for us, the outcome of each one being something that we can grasp. But if the computer performs lengthy processes of computation involving individual steps of such complexity that we cannot fully envisage their outcomes, what will our understanding amount to? We are straitjacketed by our evolutionary history and our innate linguistic abilities. The universe may not only be stranger than we imagine, it might be stranger than we can imagine. It is clear that the mathematical structures employed at the frontiers of fundamental physical theories are becoming less and less accessible even to physicists. I have a great time talking to Nobel Prize winners. I'm a member of the Committee for Science, for Physics and Chemistry of the Nobel system. It's the Royal Swedish Academy of Science. And very frequently one realizes that it's extremely difficult to follow the mathematical discourse. It's so sophisticated and so demanding. For instance, the number of individuals on the planet who are able to understand the mathematical structure of superstring theory is relatively small. And if these mathematical structures were to become just a bit more sophisticated in size and complexity, that number of people might shrink to zero. Physicists, of course, live in the hope that there is a bottom line, that one day they will have a collection of final entities that obey a small number of mathematical rules in terms of which everything else can, in principle, be described. But what if the world were like a sequence of Russian dolls? You have the doll, you open the doll, there's another doll inside, you open that one and you find a doll inside, and you keep on going. What if the world was a sequence of Russian dolls where the smaller the doll, the greater the complexity, with no way to know whether the next level down will be the last? If this should be the case, then we are as far from knowing the whole story as we ever have been. Who knows? You will have to find out. I am sometimes told that the understanding the brain is our supreme challenge. And I know that in this university, very important work is being done on questions related to this. Scanning techniques are revealing how our brains develop and how our thoughts and emotions are processed. Already new debates open up about personal responsibility and freedom. The US National Academy of Science gave recently a special award for a project entitled Neural correlates of admiration and compassion. Neural correlates of admiration and compassion. I found this scary. If scanners can reveal when we are sincere and when we are bluffing, we might as well forget about privacy. And we are living longer. Ongoing research into the genetics of aging may explain why, but the real problem is the wild card in population projections. And this is where the future generations can achieve a really substantial enhancement in lifespan. This is still speculation. Mainstream researchers and some in this audience will tell me that we have to be cautious. But this caution of having a truly substantial enhancement of life values, this caution has not stopped some 250 Americans worried that they will die before this nirvana is reached from bequeathing their bodies to be frozen, hoping that some future generations will resurrect them or download their brains into a computer. For my part, I'd rather be buried in a Muslim graveyard than in a Californian refrigerator. While we are talking about emotions, let us mention that many believe that later this centuries, robots may relate to their surroundings and to people as well, if not better than we do. If you go on the web, you'll find many of those claims. Will moral questions then arise? We consider it an obligation to ensure that other human beings can fulfill their natural potential, and we even feel the same about some animal species. But what will be our obligation towards sophisticated robots of your own creation? Should we feel guilty about exploiting them? Should we fret if they are underemployed, frustrated, or bored? Can we send them into empty space regardless of how they feel? You know, it was only in 1960 around that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. That came only 12 years after Sputnik, and only 66 years after the Wright brothers' first flight. Had that pace been sustained, we would by now have a lunar base, and we would probably have been to Mars. But the moon race was an end in itself, driven by superpower rivalry. Since those pioneering days, hundreds of astronauts have circled the Earth in low orbits, but none has gone further. Instead, unmanned technology has flourished. Probes to Mars, to the moons of Jupiter, and to Saturn have beamed back pictures of different kinds of environment. Scientific exploration goes on, and by the end of this century, it is hoped that the entire solar system will be explored by flotillas of robotic craft. Will people follow? The need weakens with each advance in robots and miniaturizations. Is it a fantasy to imagine that in a couple of centuries there may be small groups of pioneers living far from the planet Earth? If only robots make the trip, would it be appropriate to send seeds for plants genetically engineered to grow and reproduce there? Or should Mars, the most likely of planets to be reached, be preserved as a natural wilderness? If there were life there already, it might have a different DNA, and this would tell us that it had a separate origin from life on Earth. Would it then be a moral duty to preserve it unpolluted? And this leads to one of the other great unknowns. What creatures might be out there in space already? Even evidence for any bugs or bacteria would be of huge scientific importance. But what really fuels popular imagination is the prospect of advanced life, the aliens of science fiction. Mars is a frigid desert with a very thin atmosphere. There may be simple life there, perhaps also in the ice-covered oceans of Jupiter's moons Europa, but nobody expects a complex biosphere in any of these locations. Suppose, though, that we widen our gaze beyond our solar system. We have learned that many stars, probably billions in our galaxy, are orbited by planets just as the Earth, Mars, and Jupiter circle around our own star, the Sun. The planets found so far are all big ones, rather like Saturn and Jupiter, the giants of our solar system. Planets the size of our Earth are harder to detect, but in their grant applications, astronomers, as all scientists, promise that we will find within a decade and be able to view Earth-like planets encircling distant stars. This doesn't stop some from expressing firm opinions one way or the other, and I suggest we keep an open mind. We know too little about the key biological issues. The cosmos could teem with life, but it might also be the case that our Earth is unique. We don't know how life began here on Earth. We don't know what led from amino acids to the first replicating systems and on to the intricate protein chemistry of monocellular life. Life on Earth might have been a stroke of incredible luck, like shuffling a whole pack of cards into a perfect order. On the other hand, given the right environment, it might turn out that the process was almost inevitable. And even if life were widespread, would advanced life forms be common? Granted that alien minds might exist, what concepts could we share with them? Their unified theory of physics might elude us simply because it is beyond our human brains, just as surely as Einstein's ideas would baffle a chimpanzee. But from this high-flying speculation, let us go on to something more concrete. Robots as pets and friends. The Japanese have developed cuddly little toys and pets that have brought comfort to people suffering from dementia or who are simply lonely in their old age home. Pets for other pets have already been devised and are on the market. For example, robots that look like dogs and can play with real dogs while their master is away. I have been told that the problem here is that it would seem that after a while, the real dog thinks that the little robot dog is really his master. And here I have an extreme example that I did not invent, but as you know, it's a good thing to be in a technical universities. Engineering students have a very gifted imagination. I'm sure you'll all agree with this. This is one case that was suggested to me by engineering students. It's a fiction, but it's an interesting one, I believe. Let us say that you have a group of engineers and they have a colleague, let's call him Ahmed. He's a purely imaginary one, I hasten to emphasize. But he is remarkably brilliant, but extremely shy with women. He is fond of them, but he blushes if a female student smiles at him. He would like to date one of the girls in his class, but he is too embarrassed to ask any one of them. The other boys feel sorry for him, and since they are gifted young engineers, they decided to make a robot, a female android, and see whether Ahmed will feel comfortable enough to speak to this robot, to whom they give a name, Lucy. She can say, in a charming tone of voice, words like, "Hi, that's nice, I like that." So Ahmed is introduced to Irenur, and he is delighted. "I have never met such a nice girl," he tells his classmates the next morning. They are pleased, and they decide to improve the vocabulary of Lucy and to enable her to make gestures such as taking Ahmed's hand. The second meeting is even better than the first, and Ahmed wants to see Lucy again. This time the classmates wonder whether they should not tell Ahmed the truth. But one of them points out that this might be a terrible trauma for him. Why not continue the experiment with suitable improvement in Lucy's behavior? So a third meeting is arranged, after which Ahmed declares that he is in love with Lucy. Now his friends are in a quandary. What are we going to do, they ask themselves. Some say, we must tell him the truth. This can't go on. Let us tell Ahmed that Lucy is just a robot, and we are very sorry. We only wanted to make a joke. But Ahmed replies, I'm in love with Lucy. I don't care if she's a robot. Just give her back to me. What would you do? Fortunately, there are more practical and interesting challenges in which many of you will be directly or indirectly involved. I have a short list of things that will happen or should happen, and I offer them as a poor way of getting you started. You will all have much more interesting and much more relevant ideas. The first one I want to mention is safe driverless cars. I mention this because I am overwhelmed by the extraordinary competence of drivers in Istanbul. It is really and truly remarkable how so many people can drive in what I would say are trying circumstances with such calm efficiency. So that's a topic that is addressed elsewhere in a different context, but we shall then ask ourselves whether it is relevant or not. There is a category of people now who call themselves driving safety experts. Unfortunately, they are not always engineers. And they predict that once driverless technology has been fully developed, traffic collisions and resulting deaths and injuries which are caused by human error, such as delayed reaction time, tailgating, which means you're too close to the next car, rubbernecking, you're too close to one on the side, and so on, these will be substantially reduced. Again, I will quote the consulting firm McKinsey, they published a report a few months ago saying that the widespread use of autonomous vehicles could eliminate 90% of all auto accidents in the United States. Where else would they have that? It would prevent up to 190 billion in damages and health costs annually and save thousands of lives. Now, I read this and happened to, well, my first reaction when I read that was to say, wow, really this. But then I spoke to a colleague who said to me that he's working for the Time magazine, and he said that having read this report, one of his colleagues sought out driving safety experts, people who call themselves that, and that virtually none of them was able to rank driving under an autopilot system as achieving a greater level of safety than traditional full hands driving. So there's a lot of guesswork in this particular thing. But to briefly go on, the many advantages that would come from driverless cars are said to include, of course, higher speed limits, smoother rides, greater reduced traffic congestion. According to the US Highway Capacity Manual, I'm not joking, that really exists, a US Highway Capacity Manual. In their latest edition, they claim that on highways at the present time, there are about 2,200 passenger vehicles per hour per lane. They state that automated cars would increase capacity by 273%. That is roughly 8,200 cars per hour per lane. If all the cars were traveling at 120 kilometers per hour and were 6 meters apart, the capacity could reach 12,000 passenger vehicles per hour. That is up 545% from the present 2,200 cars. I bet you can easily think of potential risks and limits to such optimistic and theoretical thinking. Quite frankly, I would still want to take a taxi that has an Istanbul driver sitting and holding the wheel. The next point I would like to draw attention to is the enhancement of physical abilities. And I think that in this university, very interesting and important work is being done in this field. And I would like to say on the positive side that the future my point has been established about the need of human hands, I think. Just the next one, please. Okay, let's see, and then I'll have this. We already have cyborgs, as the name has become fashionable. Contact lenses, for instance, fix our short-sightedness. We have implants in our ears for restored hearing. And increasingly, help has been produced for people who have problems. And I have a picture here, actually, which was done outside our university in Switzerland. There were 3 individuals who, paraplegics, who accepted to use new devices. And thanks to these new devices, the idea is to have precise electrical stimulation of the spinal cord. And this is done via a wireless implant. I mean, the idea is, of course, relatively simple. You try to have precise electrical stimulation of the spinal cord via a wireless implant. And the challenge for these 3 patients was to learn how to coordinate the intention of your brain, what you want to do, your intention to walk with the targeted electrical stimulation. You can see the magnitude of the thing as I want to move this foot, and I need the right electrical stimulation to achieve that. Surprisingly, that did not take long. All 3 study participants were able to walk with body weight support after only 1 week of calibration, and voluntary muscle control improved tremendously within 5 months of training. The human nervous system responded even more profoundly to the treatment than were expected. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if in this university greater progress had not been recently done. I don't want to go on forever, so let me rather more rapidly mention other types of problems. I dare mention climate change, and I know that this is a university where much has been achieved, but it is becoming more and more urgent to find ways of sequestrating the whole problem of cutting greenhouse emissions alone. You cut the greenhouse emissions alone, it won't be enough. We will also need to improve and to remove vast amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. How can we efficiently pull out billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and what can we do with them? This is a challenge that is, there are prototypes and various things, but it's a very serious and important challenge, and I think that some of you will be involved. And if I may be so bold as to say, don't take any comfort from the fact that the president of a great republic says that climate change is fake news. It ain't fake news. Connected to this is the problem of ocean cleanup. Billions of tiny pieces of plastic, microplastics, are now floating throughout the world's oceans. Much of this waste comes from bags or straws that have been broken up over time. It's poisoning birds, fish, and humans. The effects on both human health and the environment will be profound, and it may take centuries to clean up the hundreds of millions of tons of plastic that have accumulated over the decades. And because this form of pollution is so diffuse and difficult to clean up, we need more ideas. So get ready to work on your prototype methods for tackling a massive oceanic garbage patches, and to find eventually a solution for coasts, seas, and waterways. A link to this, of course, is the problem of fresh water. Energy-efficient desalination has to be tackled. As the world population grows and climate change intensifies with droughts, the need for fresh water is going to grow more acute. Creating drinking water from the ocean ought to be a top priority. I won't mention the processes that we have now, but there is great room for radical innovation. And then my concluding observation, which is perhaps not to be taken too seriously, because you won't have this problem in this great university, but as you know, increasingly there are people who have access to information through universities that are called open universities in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere are online universities. Problems that have to be focused on are serious and are at various levels. But one of the major problems they have is giving exams to students who are taking courses online. If they do not actually come to the host university, how can you have people in remote areas? Well, I was talking to someone who is responsible for one of these programs in the open universities, and what they are trying to do is to find devices that would include facial recognition to ensure the student is taking the assessment and not someone else. Sometimes amusing to look at the problems of these. They sound rather simple things, but as a matter of fact, they are real problems. If you are going to have how can you make sure it's the student and not someone else? Second thing they would like to achieve is retina movements would be assessed to determine if the student is taking visual cues from or off the screen. Thirdly, mouth movements would be recorded to determine if the student is discussing the question with someone else. Fourth, a camera would show if anybody else is within the room. And finally, if the exam included questions asked and answered verbally, then with voice recognition software would ensure that only one person is answering these questions. Thank God you're in a real university. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, sir. Our rector will give you a gift, please.
Very nice, thank you.
Bugünün anısına plaketlerini takdim etmek üzere Sayın Rektörümüz Profesör Doktor Mehmet Karaca'yı davet ediyorum.